The obsidian walls of the Grand Synod absorbed the ambient light of the triple-star system outside, leaving the massive, tiered chamber in a state of perpetual, moody twilight that suited the gravity of the proceedings perfectly. A darkness only broken by the bioluminescent flickering of the delegates, and the harsh, holographic projections floating in the center of the vast circular pit. The air was thick, heavy with the pheromones of a dozen distinct species, a chemical cocktail of fear, aggression, and confused anxiety that tasted metallic on the tongues of those biology permitted to taste the air. High Exarch Vor, a towering crustacean entity whose chitinous armor bore the scars of the Centauri pacification campaigns, clicked his mandibles in a rhythm that betrayed his immense irritation, his compound eyes refracting the holographic display that dominated the room, a display showing absolutely nothing where something catastrophic should have been. The sensors of the Galactic Concordat, the most advanced array of detection grids ever constructed by the collaborative genius of 1,000 worlds, were screaming a flat line of data that contradicted the visual reality being reported by the border fleets, a paradox that gnawed at the logical foundations of every species present. There was a ship or an object or a phenomenon sitting in the heart of the prohibited zone, a region of space designated as the null sector due to its gravitational instability, and yet the sensors claimed the sector was empty, devoid of mass, devoid of energy, devoid of existence itself. "It is a phantom," Vor rumbled, his voice amplified by the translation matrix embedded in the obsidian dais, the sound resonating through the floor plates like the tremor of an approaching earthquake, shaking the nerves of the more fragile delegates. "We are debating a ghost story, a sensor echo caused by the gravitational shear of the black hole cluster, and I refuse to mobilize the Grand Armada for a glitch in the Orleans scanning protocols." He gestured with a massive, clawed hand toward the delegation of the Orleans, slender, fluid beings encased in environmental suits that glowed with a soft, pulsing azure light, their reliance on technology over biology making them the natural targets for Vor's disdain. "The humans are a primitive species, barely out of their cradle, barely understanding the physics of hyperlanes, and you accuse them of constructing a vessel that defies the laws of thermodynamics. It is an insult to the military history of the hegemony to suggest we fear such children." Archscrivener Alara, the head of the Orlean delegation, floated forward in her containment field, her voice synthesizing into a melodic, yet icy calm that cut through Vor's bluster. "It is not a glitch, High Exarch. We have visually confirmed the obstruction of starlight. The background radiation of the universe is being occluded. Something is there. Something massive enough to block the light of a supergiant star, yet it emits no heat, reflects no radar, and possesses no gravitational footprint that our instruments can measure. If it is a glitch, it is a glitch that casts a shadow, and regarding the humans, do not mistake their silence for ignorance. We have monitored their transmission leakage for cycles. They stopped broadcasting 2 standard cycles ago. Total silence. That is not the behavior of a chaotic young species. That is the behavior of a predator going into a crouch." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of clicks, warbles, and synthesized tones, the delegates arguing amongst themselves, the tension that had been simmering for hours finally boiling over into open dispute. The Kryn, ancient lithids who looked like living statues of eroded granite, sat in the highest tier, their silence usually commanding respect, but even they shifted uneasily, the grinding of their stone joints audible over the din. They remembered the wars of antiquity, the weapons that could erase stars, and the description of this anomaly. This nothingness that occupied space triggered racial memories of horrors long thought buried in the prehistory of the galaxy. The Concordat had maintained peace for 10,000 cycles through a balance of power, through the mutual assurance that no single species possessed a technological advantage sufficient to overwhelm the others. But if the humans, these upstarts from the Orion arm who had only joined the galactic stage a mere century ago, had bypassed the technological ladder entirely, the balance was not just threatened, it was already dead. "Silence," the word was spoken softly, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority, emanating from the central podium where the prime mediator sat, a being of pure energy contained within a lattice of gold and glass, the representative of the founding species. "The debate regarding the existence of the vessel is moot. The visual feeds from the Border Patrol are undeniable. The object is moving, it is not drifting, it is navigating. It has altered its vector 3 times in the last standard hour, correcting for the gravitational pull of the binary stars with a precision that suggests a navigational computer of immense complexity. It is coming here, to the Synod, to the heart of our governance. We must decide not if it exists, but what we will do when it arrives. The declaration hung in the air, a shroud of icy reality descending upon the heated arguments. Vor slammed a fist onto his console, cracking the interface. Then we destroy it. If it is human, it is fragile. Their ships are made of rudimentary alloys and rely on combustion and fusion. We saturate the area with plasma. We fire blindly into the shadow until we hit something. We do not wait for a diplomat to step out of a shadow that shouldn't exist. We teach them that the Concordat is not to be mocked with stealth toys. He looked around the room, seeking validation, finding the predatory gleam in the eyes of the Silthian insectoids and the grim nods of the warrior castes. We strike first. It is the only logic that guarantees survival. And if you strike and your weapons pass through it? Alara asked, her voice trembling slightly with a scientific terror that she could not suppress. If it has phased out of our dimension, or worse, high exarch, what if it absorbs the energy? We detect no heat signature. Where does the heat of the starlight it blocks go? It does not radiate, it eats the energy. If you fire plasma at a thing that eats energy, you are not attacking it, you are refueling it, you are feeding the beast. The concept silenced Vor for a moment, the tactical implications sinking in through his rage. A weapon that could not be overloaded, a shield that did not deflect but consumed. It was a nightmare scenario for a military doctrine built on overwhelming firepower. The massive holographic display in the center of the room suddenly flickered, the ambient red alert status shifting to a pulsing, violent violet, the color designating a Tier 0 event, an immediate existential proximity breach. The alarms did not sound. They were programmed to remain silent during council sessions, but the light bathed the faces of the delegates in a ghostly, unnatural hue. The sensors of the station, the most sensitive in the galaxy, registered a proximity warning, not from the edge of the system, not from the hyperlane buoy, but from directly outside the station's viewports. The anomaly had not traveled through the system. It had not traversed the distance in any way that physics understood. It had simply ceased to be there and started to be here. The entire wall of the Synod chamber, a transparent megastructure of diamond glass meant to offer a view of the stars, suddenly went black. Not the black of space, which is filled with distant stars and nebulae, but a flat, matte, absolute blackness that hurt the eyes to look at. The ship, if it could be called a ship, had positioned itself directly against the station, a hull of such immense proportions that it blocked out the universe. It was smooth, devoid of features. No engine ports, no weapon blisters, no windows, just a wall of abyssal geometry that seemed to drink the light from the room. The delegates rose in unison, a wave of terror rippling through the varied species, Vor's mandibles chattering involuntarily, Alara gripping the edge of her console until her knuckles turned white. Shields, Vor roared, though the command was futile. The station's shields were already up, but the object was inside the perimeter. It had bypassed the deflection screens without triggering a single fluctuation. The massive black wall remained motionless, hovering silently against the fragile glass of the council chamber. There was no vibration, no hum of engines, no sense of mass, only a visual void that defied the brain's ability to process depth. It was as if a hole had been punched in the fabric of reality, and the shape of that hole was a warship. Then the communications grid lit up. It was not a hail, it was not a request for docking, it was a takeover. Every screen in the chamber, from the personal datapads of the scribes to the massive central projector, synchronized instantly, displaying a single, stark symbol, a golden circle intersected by a vertical line, the ancient, simplified glyph for humanity that they had used during their initial, humble petition to join the Concordat. But the symbol was different now. It was sharp, aggressive, stylized with a geometric perfection that implied a mathematical mastery, far beyond what the Council believed the humans possessed. The audio channels cracked open, bypassing the station's security protocols with contemptuous ease. The voice that filled the chamber was not synthesized, nor was it aggressive. It was calm, terrifyingly, unnervingly calm. It sounded weary, like a mountain that had weathered a million storms. This is Admiral Julian Thorne of the unit. Ed-Terran Coalition vessel the Silent Vigil, the voice intoned, the human language being translated in real time with a clarity that suggested the humans had hacked the translation matrix long ago. We apologize for the abrupt arrival. Traditional travel methods were insufficient for the urgency of this meeting. We request the floor. Do not activate your weapon systems. We do not wish to damage your station with the feedback loop. Vor looked at his tactical readout. The station's defense batteries were locked, the targeting computers spinning in loops, unable to acquire a lock on a target that returned 0 data. He looked up at the black wall outside. "You are trespassing in the High Synod," he shouted, his bravado warring with his instinct for self-preservation. "You have violated the sovereignty of the Concordat. Identify the nature of your vessel immediately or be considered a hostile entity." "Hostility implies intent to harm," the voice of Thorn replied, the tone remaining flat, devoid of the fear Vor tried to instill. "We have no such intent. If we did, High Exarch, you would not be speaking. You would be dust. We are docking. Stand by." The audacity of the statement froze the room. Before any order could be given to repel boarders, a section of the diamond glass wall, the strongest material known to material science, capable of withstanding a supernova's shockwave, simply dissolved. It didn't break, it didn't shatter. It turned into mist and then vanished, leaving an open aperture into the black hull of the ship. But the atmosphere did not rush out. There was no explosive decompression. A shimmering field held the air in, a field so subtle it was nearly invisible. From the darkness of the ship's interior, a walkway extended, formed of the same matte black material, bridging the gap between the vessel and the council floor. 3 figures walked out of the darkness. They were human. They wore no power armor, no environmental suits, no visible weapons. They were dressed in dress uniforms of a deep midnight blue, adorned with simple silver piping. The central figure, an older male with hair the color of steel and eyes that looked like they had seen the death of stars, walked with a cane, though his stride suggested he didn't truly need it. He was flanked by 2 younger officers, one holding a datapad, the other with hands clasped behind her back. They walked into the heart of the most powerful political assembly in the galaxy as if they were walking into a village town hall. Admiral Thorn stopped in the center of the holographic pit, the alien delegates towering over him on their raised tiers. He looked small, fragile, a bag of water and calcium in a room of armored chitons and energy beings. Yet his presence possessed a gravitational pull of its own. He looked up, meeting Vor's gaze, then Alara, then the Prime Mediator, S. "We have been listening," Thorn said, his voice unamplified yet carrying clearly in the acoustics of the chamber. "We have heard your debates. You call us children. You call us upstarts. You wonder why we went silent. You wonder why we built this." He gestured vaguely back toward the massive ship that loomed like a thunderhead. "You assume we built it for you. That is the arrogance of the Concordat. You believe everything in the galaxy revolves around your politics, your borders, your wars." "If not for us, then for what?" the Prime Mediator asked, the light in its containment lattice pulsing with curiosity. "Why build a ship that hides from physics? A ship that violates the Treaty of Dimensional Stability? You have risked tearing the fabric of subspace." "Physics is a suggestion, not a law, once you understand the underlying code of the universe," Thorn replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We did not build the Silent Vigil to conquer the Concordat. We have no interest in your trade routes or your resource worlds. We built it because we looked out." He pointed a finger upwards. "Not at the stars within the galaxy. We looked out, beyond the rim, into the dark space between galaxies. The void that you ignore, because there is no profit there." Alara leaned forward, her sensors scanning the Admiral, finding his heart rate slow, steady. He was telling the truth. "What did you see?" she whispered. Thorn signaled to the officer with the datapad. "Show them." The central hologram of the chamber, previously controlled by the station's mainframe, was instantly overwritten. The image shifted to a view of the galactic rim, looking outward into the intergalactic void. At first, it looked like empty blackness. Then the view magnified, and magnified again. It focused on a distant cluster of galaxies, millions of light-years away. "This is the cluster you call NGC 4402, Thorn narrated. "Or rather, it was." The image sped up, a time-lapse covering the last 10 years. The stars in the distant galaxy didn't just go out, they vanished. Entire spiral arms were erased, seemingly eaten by an encroaching shadow that was darker than the vacuum around it. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was moving with purpose. It was a tide, a swarm. "We call them the entropic tide," Thorn said, the lightness gone from his voice, replaced by a cold, hard iron. "They do not conquer, they unmake. They consume the energy of existence itself. They are not biological, not technological. They are an antibody of the universe designed to wipe the slate clean. We detected their echo 50 years ago. We calculated their trajectory. They are not coming for a specific system. They are coming for this galaxy, all of it." A silence deeper than the one before descended on the chamber. The scale of the threat was beyond comprehension. The squabbles over border disputes and trade tariffs suddenly seemed infinitesimally small. We went silent, Thorne continued, because we realized that radio waves, hyperlane breaches, and shield harmonics are like ringing a dinner bell to them. They track energy usage. They track civilization. The noisier you are, the faster they come. The Concordat, you are very noisy. Vor slumped back in his throne, his aggression deflated by the sheer magnitude of the revelation. "And the ship?" he asked, his voice a rasp. "That thing outside." "The Silent Vigil is a prototype," Thorne explained. "It does not use zero-point energy or fusion. It runs on a null drive. It pulls energy from the spaces between realities, effectively creating a thermodynamic negative. To the Tide, this ship does not exist. It is a blind spot, a hole in their vision. It is the only place in the galaxy where we can hide." "Hide," the Prime Mediator's light dimmed. "You built an ark, you intend to flee." Thorne shook his head slowly. "No, humans do not flee, we endure, we built a fortress. But we realize something else. We cannot save ourselves if the galaxy burns around us. The ship is not just a bunker. It is a lure and a trap." The Admiral began to pace, the tap of his cane echoing rhythmically. "The technology to build the Silent Vigil required us to strip mine 3 dead systems and harness the power of a captured singularity. It took the total industrial output of the human coalition for 20 years. We starved ourselves to build it. We sacrificed our luxury, our comfort, our expansion, all for this one vessel. Because we knew that when the Tide arrives, your fleets, your beautiful, bright, loud fleets will be swept away in minutes. Your shields will be drained, your plasma will be eaten." "So you came to mock us," a reptilian delegate hissed from the shadows, "to tell us we are already dead." "I came to offer you a chance," Thorne said, stopping and turning to face the entire assembly. "The Silent Vigil creates a field of null entropy. Inside its radius, the Tide cannot see you. They cannot feed on you. We can extend this field. We can cloak the core systems. We can hide the light of our stars from the enemy's eyes. But to do that, we need to link the ship to the Concordat's energy grid. We need to use your station, this station, as an amplifier." "That would require giving you control of the entire network," Vor said, suspicion returning. "You could shut down our defenses. You could enslave us in the dark." Thorne sighed, a sound of immense fatigue. "If we wanted to enslave you, High Exarch, we would have let the Tide come and pick through the ruins. We are offering to stand in front of the bullet. But we cannot do it alone. The ship is powerful, but it is one ship. The Tide is billions. We need your infrastructure to broadcast the masking signal." The debate that followed was not the chaotic shouting match of before. It was a terrified, whispered conferral. The evidence on the screen was undeniable. The Orlean scientists were already confirming the data, their faces pale behind their environmental masks. The galaxy was being eaten, star by star, and the humans, the primitives, the quiet ones, were the only ones who had seen it coming. They had not been sleeping. They had been sharpening a knife in the dark. "We do not trust you," Vor said finally, rising to his full height. "But we fear the dark more. If this is a trick, Admiral, the hegemony will spend its last breath destroying your world." "If this is a trick," Thorne replied dryly, "you won't have a breath to spend." The integration began immediately. The Silent Vigil did not dock in the traditional sense. It extended tendrils of the matte black material, fusing with the station's superstructure. The alien engineers watched in horror and awe as the human technology overrode their own, not by hacking, but by simply being more advanced, a paradigm of physics that made their own tech look like clockwork toys. The human engineers worked alongside the aliens, their demeanor professional, efficient, and grim. They didn't brag, they didn't gloat. They worked with the urgency of people who knew the clock was ticking. Hours turned into days, the atmosphere in the station changed. The fear of the humans was replaced by a strange reverence. The sheer scale of the vigil became apparent as data streams revealed its internal dimensions. It was bigger on the inside, folded into pocket dimensions. It held habitats, factories, biospheres. It was a world capability of sustaining billions. The humans had prepared to save as many as they could. Then the sensors triggered. Not the Orlean sensors, but the human ones, feeding directly into the council chamber's main display. A red ripple appeared at the edge of the system. "They are here," Thorne said, standing in the center of the command deck, which had effectively become the war room for the galaxy. Early, they sensed the energy spike of the integration. The entropic tide did not emerge from hyperspace. They bled into reality, Tiers in space opened, and from them poured shapes that hurt the mind to comprehend, fractal shifting geometries of darkness that seemed to twist the starlight around them. They were not ships, they were entities of void. They moved toward the station, a swarm of thousands, then millions. The stars behind them flickered and dimmed as they passed. "Shields up," Vor screamed, panic overtaking him. "No shields," Thorn ordered, his voice cutting through the panic. "Shields emit energy. Drop them, all of them, power down the reactors, kill the lights, total blackout." "Are you insane?" Alara cried. "We will be defenseless." "We are already defenseless if we fight," Thorn snapped. "Do it, trust the null field." With agonizing reluctance, the order was given. The station went dark. The hum of the reactors died. The artificial gravity persisted only on emergency reserves. The delegates stood in the darkness, illuminated only by the passive glow of the starlight through the viewports. The massive bulk of the silent vigil pulsed once, a ripple of non-light that washed over the station and expanded outward, encompassing the inner planets of the system. The tide approached. The swarm was a hurricane of destruction, a cloud of locusts made of anti-reality. They swept through the outer asteroid belt, dissolving rock and ice into nothingness. They approached the station. The alien delegates held their breath, praying to gods they hadn't believed in for centuries. Vor clutched his sidearm, trembling. Alara closed her eyes. The swarm hit the perimeter of the null field and flowed around it. Like water around a stone, the tide parted. To them, the station, the humans, the council, simply weren't there. There was no energy to consume, no matter to unmake. The vigil was broadcasting a signal that told the universe, nothing exists here. The swarm passed, the horrible, screeching static of their presence washing over the station's passive sensors, a sound like a billion fingernails on a chalkboard. Minutes stretched into hours. The main body of the tide moved on, seeking the brighter, tastier stars of the core systems that had not yet been cloaked. "They are passing us," Alara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It worked. By the makers, it worked." "Not yet," Thorn said. He wasn't celebrating, he was watching the tactical plot. "We are the stone in the river, but we need to divert the river." He turned to his comms officer. "Activate the lure." "Admiral," the officer hesitated. "That will expose the ship, will be the only light in the dark." "That's the point, Lieutenant. We pull them in, we bunch them up, and then we detonate the singularity drive." The council froze. The implication was clear. "You intend to sacrifice the ship?" Vor asked, his voice low, stripped of its arrogance. "The ship is a tool," Thorn said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "It served its purpose, it bought us time, it proved the technology works. Now we use it to hurt them." Thorn turned to the council. "I need you to evacuate to the station's hardened bunkers. I'm detaching the vigil. We are going to draw them away from the system, into the gravity well of the binary stars. When they swarm us, we will collapse the ship's drive core. It will create a localized event horizon. It won't kill them all, but it will break the back of this vanguard. It will give you the time you need to retrofit your fleets with null emitters." "You will die," the Prime Mediator stated, a statement of fact. "We are soldiers," Thorn said simply. "We spent our lives preparing for a war we hoped would never come. Now that it's here, we do not shy away from the cost." He tapped his cane on the deck. "Get off my bridge, all of you. This is a human operation now." The alien delegates did not move initially. They looked at the small, frail-looking man who commanded a vessel of nightmares. They looked at the humans who had been mocked, underestimated, and feared. And they saw, for the first time, the terrifying resolve that lay beneath the soft skin. The humans were not predators like the Scythians, nor scholars like the Orleans. They were protectors. And they were willing to burn themselves to ash to keep the darkness at bay. One by one, the delegates bowed, a gesture of supreme respect in the Galactic Concordat. Vor, the warmonger, saluted, a sharp clash of claw against chitin. "The hegemony will not forget this, Admiral. Your names will be carved in the Hall of Martyrs." "Just make sure the signal goes out," Thorn said, turning back to the view screen. "Save the rest, go." The delegates evacuated. The silent vigil detached from the station, a massive shadow pulling away from the sanctuary it had created. As it moved, it dropped the null field around itself. Suddenly, on the sensors of the tide, a sun appeared where there was none. A beacon of immense energy, screaming defiance into the void. The swarm turned. The ocean of darkness shifted its course, drawn by the irresistible light of the human ship. They converged on it, a swirling vortex of destruction. On the station, Vor, Ilara, and the others watched from the viewports. They saw the silent vigil accelerate, not away from the enemy, but into the heart of the binary star system. It drew the tide with it, thousands upon thousands of entities chasing the bait. "They are surrounded," Ilara sobbed, watching the telemetry. The ship was buried under layers of the enemy. The hull was breaching. The darkness was eating the metal. Inside the bridge of the vigil, Thorn watched the hull integrity drop. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The screams of the hull metal buckling were deafening. He looked at his crew. They were calm. They were typing commands, routing power, holding the line. "Drive core at critical," the lieutenant reported. "Containment failing in 10 seconds." Thorn leaned on his cane. He didn't look back. He looked forward into the abyss that was eating his view screen. "Let there be light," he whispered. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but the flash blinded the sensors of half the sector. The silent vigil didn't just explode. It inverted. The singularity drive collapsed, pulling the fabric of space-time in upon itself, then rebounding with the force of a supernova constrained within a few thousand kilometers. The gravitational shockwave shattered the binary star's rhythm, creating a flare that scoured the system with purifying fire. The vanguard of the tide was erased, vaporized, crushed, and burned in a single moment of human defiance. When the light faded, the silent vigil was gone. The binary stars were stabilizing. The system was quiet. In the grand synod chamber, the silence was absolute. No one spoke. The petty politics, the grandstanding, the arrogance, it had all been burned away by the flash of the sacrifice. Vor walked to the center of the room. He looked at the empty space where Thorn had stood. He activated the galaxy-wide communication grid. "This is High Exarch Vor," he spoke, his voice heavy with a new kind of strength. "Transmit the human data packages to every world, every outpost, every ship. Begin retrofitting immediately. The tide is coming, but we have been given a shield, and we have been given a sword." He looked up at the symbol of humanity still displaying on the main screen, the golden circle and the line. "The humans are not children," Vor declared to the galaxy. "They are the elders we did not know we had, and today they taught us how to stand." The camera panned out from the station, drifting into the cold of space, where debris from the battle drifted. Among the twisted metal and dissipating energy, a single piece of the silent vigil's hull floated, scarred but intact. On it, scorched but legible, was the motto of the Terran Coalition, a phrase that would become the rallying cry for a united galaxy in the war to come. "Ad astra per aspera," to the stars through difficulties. The war had begun, but for the first time the galaxy was not fighting against itself. It was fighting for existence, united by the ghosts of a ship that shouldn't have existed but saved them all. But the story did not end in the silence of the debris field. Deep in the subspace strata, a frequency hummed. It was faint, barely detectable, resonating on a wavelength that the Concordat sensors could not pick up, but which the surviving human databanks on the station began to record automatically. It was a signal. A dead man's switch triggered by the collapse of the singularity drive. Arch-scrivener Ilara was the first to notice the anomaly on her personal console. She wiped her eyes, focusing on the data stream. It wasn't a distress beacon. It was a cartographic update, a map. "Speaker Orn," she called out, her voice trembling. "The human admiral, he left something behind." The ancient Kryn slowly turned his stone head. "What is it?" "It's a coordinate," Ilara said, projecting the data into the center of the room. "A rendezvous point, deep in the galactic core, in the region we thought was uninhabitable due to radiation." The map unfolded, showing a path through the deadly radiati. On storms of the core, and at the end of the path, nestled in a pocket of artificial stability, was not just a base. It was a fleet. Thousands of signals, not ships like the Silent Vigil, but variations. Cruisers, carriers, logistical hubs. The Silent Vigil had been a prototype, yes, but it had also been a scout. The humans hadn't just built one ship. They had moved their entire civilization into the dark. They had been building an armada in the one place the aliens wouldn't look, the radioactive hell of the core. They didn't just sacrifice themselves, Vor realized, staring at the display with widening eyes. They were buying time for the rest of them to wake up. A message scrolled across the bottom of the map, text-only, simple, and utilitarian. Phase 1 complete. Vanguard neutralized. The Silent Vigil has fallen. We are the sleeping giant, and we are awake. Rendezvous at coordinates. We have room for everyone. The realization hit the council with the force of a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been hiding, they had been fortifying. The silent vigil was the tip of the spear, but the spear itself was massive, hidden, and ready. The despair that had threatened to overtake the council after Thorne's death evaporated, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and hope. They were not alone. They were not defenseless. "Initiate the protocols," the Prime Mediator ordered, its light shining brighter than ever before. "Send the fleets to the core. If the humans have built a fortress there, we will man the walls." As the alien fleets began to mobilize, turning their prows toward the galactic core, the camera of history pulled back further, revealing the vast swirl of the galaxy. The darkness of the entropic tide was still out there, a massive stain on the stars closing in from the void. But in the center of the galaxy, a new light was kindling, a light born of unity, sacrifice, and the terrifying, beautiful ingenuity of humanity. The warship that shouldn't have existed was gone, but it had ignited a fire that would burn until the last star went out. The unseen had become the beacon, and in the darkness of the universe, the galaxy finally understood what the humans had known all along. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the strength to protect the light when the dark comes knocking, and humanity was the doorman. The final image was of the station's main viewport, where the humans had first walked in. The glass was repaired, the view restored. The stars shone cold and distant, but the reflection in the glass was not of fear. It was of 1,000 different species, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking out into the dark, ready. "Let them come," Vor whispered, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon, his other hand resting gently on the shoulder of the human liaison officer who had remained behind. "We are ready." The human officer, a young ensign with eyes as hard as flint, nodded slowly. "Yes, High Exarch, we are." And the galaxy turned together to face the night. The atmospheric tension of the aftermath lingered, heavy and profound. The delegates did not immediately disperse to their quarters or their command ships. There was a shared need to process the paradigm shift that had just occurred. The Grand Synod, for thousands of years a place of bickering and political maneuvering, had been transformed into a sacred ground of alliance. The air filters hummed, cycling out the pheromones of panic and replacing them with the sterile, cool air of resolve. Alara remained at her console, her aquatic fingers dancing over the holographic interface, dissecting the data package Thorne had left behind. The technology was staggering. The null drive wasn't just a propulsion system, it was a fundamental rewriting of spatial mechanics. It didn't move the ship, it moved the universe around the ship. The implications for logistics, for communication, for weaponry were infinite. But what struck her most was the medical data. The humans had included detailed genetic banks, preservation protocols for every species in the Concordat. They had anticipated the possibility of failure. They had prepared to clone the alien races if the worst happened. It was an act of benevolence so profound it made her hearts ache. "They catalogued us," she murmured to Vor, who was overseeing the deployment of the hegemony's vanguard. "Look at this. They have the genetic sequences of the Silthian queens. They have the larval stages of the Kryn. They didn't just build a warship, Vor. They built a backup drive for civilization." Vor grunted, a sound that was less guttural than usual. "They possess a strategic foresight that makes my war colleges look like nurseries. To plan for one's own extinction is logical. To plan for the extinction of one's rivals, that is unnatural. It is noble." He tested the word as if it were a foreign flavor. "The hegemony has always valued strength. We thought strength was armor, mandibles, plasma. But this," he gestured to the empty space where the vigil had been. "To die so that others may live, that is a strength we have not cultivated." "We will have to learn it," Speaker Orn rumbled, descending from his high tier, his stone footsteps heavy. "The Kryn remember the old wars, we remember the scourges that came before, but we hid. We turned to stone and waited for the storms to pass. The humans did not hide, they walked into the storm. We have been the elders in name only, they are the elders in spirit." Mobilization of the galaxy was a sight of terrifying beauty. The hyperlanes, usually clogged with trade freighters and luxury liners, were cleared for military traffic. The disparate fleets of the Concordat, the sleek, organic ships of the Orleans, the blocky, armored dreadnoughts of the hegemony, the crystalline spheres of the Kryn began to move in unison. They were no longer flying separate flags. They were painting the human symbol on their hulls, the circle and the line. It was a talisman, a promise. Deep in the galactic core, the human armada waited. The sleeping giant. The name was apt. As the first Concordat ships navigated the radiation storms, guided by the human algorithms, they broke through the interference clouds and saw it. A Dyson swarm. Not a completed sphere, but a lattice of millions of habitats and dry docks orbiting the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's heart. The humans hadn't just built a fleet. They were harvesting the rotational energy of the galactic core itself. The sheer industrial capacity required was mind-bending. While the Concordat had been arguing over trade taxes, humanity had been taming a black hole. Admiral Thorne's voice, recorded, played on a loop on the approach channels. "Welcome to Bastion. Maintain formation. Docking bays are open. We have food, we have fuel, we have ammo. Leave your politics at the radiation belt. Here, we are one fleet." Vor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Mandible of Glory, as it approached the massive human shipyards. He watched the swarm of human tugs and repair drones zip around his vessel, guiding him in. He saw human workers in EVA suits waving from the gantries. He saw the sheer scale of the operation, a civilization geared entirely for survival. "Exarch," his tactical officer clicked. "We are receiving a transmission from the human high command. They request a meeting of the Joint Chiefs." "Put it through," Vor said. The screen flickered and a woman appeared. She was older than Thorne, her face lined with the stress of a century of command, but her eyes were the same: steel and fire. "Hi, Exarch Vor," she said. "I am Fleet Admiral Halloway. Thorne spoke highly of you. He said you were a stubborn crustacean, but you'd hold the line when it mattered." Vor let out a chittering laugh. "He was insolent to the end. I admired him." "He did his job," Halloway said, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Now we do ours. We have the manufacturing capability to retrofit your entire fleet with null shielding in 3 months. But we need materials. We need the Concordat's resource networks. We need your mining fleets." "You shall have them," Vor promised. "Every drone, every transport, every ounce of ore, the hegemony is at your disposal." "Good," Halloway said, "because the tide isn't just coming from the rim anymore. They're manifesting in the mid-sectors. They're adapting. We have a fight on our hands, Exarch, a long one." "We are ready," Vor repeated the words he had spoken in the Synod. "Admiral, the silent vigil, is there another?" Halloway smiled, a grim, predatory baring of teeth. "The vigil was a prototype, Exarch. The Vengeance class is rolling off the assembly line next Tuesday, and it's bigger." Vor looked at the human woman, this fragile, soft creature who spoke of building leviathans in the shadow of a black hole, and he felt a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. Not the fragile hope of a prayer, but the solid, heavy hope of a loaded weapon. "Then let us begin," Vor said. "Ad astra per aspera." "To the stars," Halloway echoed. The screen faded, returning to the view of the bastion. The galaxy was dark, filled with monsters that ate stars. But in the center there was a forge. And in that forge, the peoples of the Milky Way were hammering out their future, striking the iron while it was hot, sparks flying into the void, a testament to the fact that existence is not given, it is earned. And they would earn it, side by side, until the end of time. The narrative arc of the universe bent toward entropy, toward decay and silence. It was the natural order. But life, specifically sentient life, was the rebellion against that order. And humanity had just handed the galaxy the ultimate manifesto of rebellion. The silent vigil was gone, but its silence rang louder than any explosion. It was the silence of the breath held before the trigger is pulled. It was the silence of the predator watching from the all grass. It was the silence of the void, weaponized by the very beings it sought to consume. As the fleets merged, alien and human crews began to mingle in the mess halls and engineering bays of Bastion. They shared food, though biochemistry made some sharing impossible. They shared stories. The Orleans explained the harmonics of crystals. The humans explained the chaotic efficiency of duct tape and percussive maintenance. The Kryn told epic poems that lasted for days. The humans introduced them to heavy metal music, which the Kryn found surprisingly soothing, akin to the grinding of tectonic plates. Cultural barriers dissolved under the pressure of mutual survival. Prejudice, that luxury of peace, was discarded. A Scythian warrior saved a human engineer from a plasma leak. A human medic treated an Orleans decompression sickness. Bonds were forged in the fire of preparation. And out in the dark, the entropic tide paused. The hive mind of the antareality sensed the change. The prey was no longer scattering. The prey was bunching up. The prey was quieting down. The galaxy, which had been a buffet of chaotic noise, was becoming a fortress of silence. And for the first time in eons, the tide felt something akin to hesitation. It did not know fear, but it knew resistance. And as it gathered its strength for the final push toward the core, it knew that this galaxy would not go quietly into the night. It would not vanish without a fight. It would rage against the dying of the light. And leading the rage, standing on the bridge of a ship named Vengeance, was humanity, the species that looked into the abyss, saw it staring back, and decided to poke it in the eye. The story of the silent vigil became legend, whispered in the barracks and preached in the temples. But the story of the war of the core was just beginning. It would be a war of shadows and light, of physics and will. But the ending was no longer written in stone. The ink was wet, the pen was in their hands, and the galaxy was ready to write its own destiny.